Hi everyone, welcome to our scissor jack analysis. We have been tasked with designing a scissor jack that can lift 2,000 pounds 6 inches. We had to create a list of requirements that we wanted to design around for our scissor jack, and they're the following. As mentioned, we want our scissor jack to support 2,000 pounds safely. By safe, we mean that it passes certain criteria for the safety factors based on certain failure methods. For example, we chose a safety factor of 4 for the crossbar buckling, safety factor for 1.5 for diagonal bearing, 4 for diagonal tear-out, 4 for axial failure, 1.5 for pin bearing, and 4 for pin shear. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that our scissor jack doesn't cause any harm and that it performs as desired. On top of that, we also wanted to create a scissor jack that was light, so we have the requirement that is less than 10 pounds. We believe that this is completely possible if we choose the right material and if we optimize the cross-sectional area of each member. The next requirement that we have is that it is cheap. And we have created a function that optimizes the material usage as well as the material choice to provide a combination of crossbar and diagonal that provides us with the lowest cost. We also don't want the scissor jack to be too big. As mentioned, we would like this to be portable and light, so this is a limit that the diagonal member cannot be longer than 2 feet. And we will now begin to explain how we explored the design space.
So when it came to exploring the design space, there's a few different things we did. We looked at different materials. We ended up optimizing for 8 of those materials that we looked at. Then we also changed the cross-sectional shapes of both the crossbar and the diagonal members. For the crossbar, we obviously left that as a cylindrical member since we have to thread it. For the diagonals, we varied the thickness, width, and length of a cross-section that's a rectangle. And we also varied the diameter of a circular cross-section for those diagonal members, which is a little more complicated because, as you can see, the thickness varies throughout, and so those equations we're using are going to change slightly. To account for this varying thickness, we had to learn how to parameterize functions to find the different stress plane areas that we were going to use in our calculations. To do this, we created a chord function that takes the diameter of the hole we drilled to find these chords here as shown. This allows us to calculate the shear stress plane for tear-out stress perfectly, as well as approximate this square grid here as shown, using the diameter of the hole as the other side. Now, using this grid, we're then able to approximate the planes for bearing stress and max axial stress. While this isn't an exact approximation, in the verification step, we learned the need to verify this assumption. As you can see, the areas that we're missing are negligible and thus not greatly impacting this optimization process. But if we're to use this in a final design, we'd want to verify it wasn't affecting the final design.
In order to identify the best geometry for our scissor jack, we chose to use the FMinCon optimizer in MATLAB and learned 2 main things from this. First, we wanted to minimize both the weight and the cost of the scissor jack to make it lightweight and easy to install, and cheap. In order to do so, we needed to find an objective function that could combine both cost and weight. To do so, we did a Google search which showed that cost squared plus weight squared was a good metric for doing so because it minimized the magnitude of the weight and cost vector. Additionally, we wanted to constrain our optimizer using safety factors. One of these safety factors was for buckling, and we did not know prior to performing the optimization if the crossbar would be an Euler or a Johnson column. In order to work around this, we did the optimization both assuming a Johnson and an Euler column, and then after the fact checked which column the crossbar actually was and only saved that result to our CSV file. Our optimizer ran through every combination of 8 different materials, as well as a circular and a rectangular cross-section for our diagonal, and output the best dimensions for the crossbar and the diagonal into a CSV file. It then organized the CSV file from cheapest to most expensive, and that way we could look at the CSV file and very quickly identify what combination of materials, as well as what dimensions for our crossbar and our diagonal would yield the cheapest and lightest weight scissor jack.
So after exploring many different options and optimizing for some ideal solutions, our selected crossbar design is shown here. It's made of carbon steel 1030 for the crossbar, and the diagonal members are made of cast nylon PA6. Each diagonal member is about 7.5 inches, giving it a fully extended length of 15 inches. It weighs 1.87 pounds and comes in at a material cost of $1.23. So very cheap, very light, which is what we were optimizing for. Some things that we were surprised by were that the ideal material for the diagonal members is polymer. That's not something we thought would happen. Additionally, something interesting that we noted in our optimal solution is that the diagonal member cross-section actually converged to be about a perfectly square shape in our solution. And so something we learned was the importance of exploration, because going into this, a lot of us had kind of the intuitive hunch that the ideal solution would be metal for what we were optimizing for. And we were actually hesitant to explore polymers like nylon, for example. But surprisingly, after optimizing for what we wanted, nylon ended up being part of our solution. And so we're grateful that we did that broad exploration and came to this solution.